Alexander III of Macedon, king of Macedonia in the 4th century BC, the leader who brought down the Persian Empire and expanded his influence from Greece to India in just 13 years. At the age of 20, Alexander the Great inherited an invincible army and a state built for war. In just 13 years, he brought down the Persian Empire, the greatest power the ancient world had ever known. He never lost a battle. He never retreated. Yet, everything collapsed the moment he died. Was Alexander the greatest military leader in history? Or is he the clearest proof that individual genius, no matter how great, is not enough to build an empire that will last? This video isn't about the myth we like to repeat, but about the truth we avoid facing. What happens when power exceeds human limits? But to understand Alexander, we must stop looking at him as an individual miracle. Alexander didn't appear out of nowhere. This army wasn't built by him, nor did he choose the battlefield from the start. Before Alexander the Great, there was Philip II, a man who didn't conquer the world, but he built the instrument that conquered the world. Alexander III of Macedon was born in 356 BC in Pella, the capital of Macedonia. He was the son of King Philip II, the man who transformed Macedonia from a marginal kingdom into the most powerful military force in Greece. His mother, Olympias, was a princess from Epirus, fiercely ambitious, strong-willed, and a firm believer that her son was destined for an extraordinary fate. Alexander grew up with a father who taught him the art of war and state building, and a mother who instilled in him the idea of superiority and divine selection. This tension between military discipline and mythical ambition shaped his character from childhood. Philip II wasn't just Alexander's father. He was the architect of the entire project. He reorganized the army, he created the Macedonian phalanx, and he unified Greece through force and diplomacy. Olympias was no ordinary royal wife. She believed that Alexander was the son of Zeus and nurtured in him a sense of superiority and destiny. Did Alexander have brothers? This is a point where many people get it wrong. Alexander did not have any full brothers who directly challenged him for the throne. However, he did have a half-brother, Philip Aridius, later Philip III. He was mentally weak and unfit to rule. This is very important because Alexander did not face a succession struggle, but he also did not learn how to rule with internal balance. Alexander studied under the Greek philosopher Aristotle between 343 and 340 BC, at the behest of his father, Philip II. But note, Aristotle did not teach him how to lead an army. He taught him logic, politics, Homeric literature, specifically the Iliad, the idea of Greek superiority over the barbarians. Philip II was Alexander's actual military school. From him, he learned management, discipline, and dirty politics, alliance, betrayal, political marriage. That war is an extension of the state, not a personal adventure. And this is a figure many overlook. Leonidas, a relative of Olympias, oversaw Alexander's upbringing. He imposed austerity on him, and harsh sleep, self-discipline, and endurance of hunger. This explains Alexander's ability to endure long campaigns more than any other king. Alexander the Great's first leadership test before the conquest of Persia in 336 BC, Alexander inherited not only an army, but also a kingdom whose legitimacy was questionable, and a Greece poised for rebellion. He was 20 years old. His father had been suddenly killed, and there were Greek cities that saw an opportunity to secede. The first rebellion, Thebes, the city of Thebes declared rebellion, believing that a young ruler inexperienced in power would not dare to confront him. Alexander's response: he moved with lightning speed. He besieged the city. He almost completely destroyed it. He sold its inhabitants into slavery. He spared only the temples and the house of the poet Pindar. This was not madness, but a bloody political message. Why is this so important? Because Alexander wasn't seeking the title of favored one. He wanted absolute submission. In doing so, he proved that early mercy meant the collapse of the project. This mindset would later accompany him in Asia. The strategic outcome: after Thebes, silence reigned in Greece. No one dared to rebel. Alexander became the undisputed leader. With this bloody decision, Alexander paved the way for the conquest of Persia. After subjugating Greece by force, Alexander did not declare war on Persia as a conqueror. Rather, he presented himself as the avenger of an old vendetta. The stated pretext: Alexander essentially said, Persia had previously invaded Greece. He meant the Marathon and Salamis wars. The time had come for Greek revenge. He was the leader of the campaign to liberate Asia. This is clever political rhetoric. Not the whole truth. The real motive: Persia was internally weakened. There were power struggles within it. Strong governors and weak central authorities. The Macedonian army was geared towards offense, not defense. Keeping it idle meant the risk of rebellion. Money, and the Persian treasury meant funding the army, buying loyalties, building a personal project. Alexander wasn't asking, should I invade Persia? But when the actual declaration came in 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor, declaring war. He made a significant symbolic gesture. He offered a sacrifice at Troy. He carried a copy of the Iliad. He presented himself as the heir of Achilles. With this declaration, not just a war between two nations began, but a new era in the history of power, where morality is used to justify empires. The first battle was the Battle of Granicus, 334 BC. On the banks of the Granicus River, Alexander was not only facing the Persians, but also testing his legitimacy as a conquering leader. Location: Asia Minor, northwest Anatolia. Opponent: the local Persian governors, satraps with powerful cavalry. The Persians had a high defensive position across the river. Alexander's mistake: crossing the river under fire. Many commanders would have waited. Alexander did not, and the decisive decision was made. Commander Parmenon advised him, let's postpone the attack until morning. Alexander refused. Why? Postponement would be a sign of weakness to the army. Alexander wanted an early psychological shock. He believed that boldness unsettles a hesitant opponent. This was a high-stakes leadership decision. No blind recklessness. And then came the moment of battle. Alexander led the attack himself. He targeted the Persian command center. He was nearly killed by an axe blow, were it not for the intervention of Clytus the Black. This is not a heroic tale for show. If Alexander had died here, the entire project would have been over. And the result: a clear Persian defeat, and the death of prominent Persian commanders, and the opening of the gates of Asia Minor, city after city. But most importantly, the myth of the invincible knight was shattered. A critical reading of what happened: the truth is that the battle was a gamble. It succeeded because the army was well trained. The leadership was at the forefront. The enemy was divided and fragmented. Alexander was there, a leader who knew when to take risks, and when he couldn't afford to wait. At Granicus, Alexander not only defeated the Persians, but also convinced his army that nothing was impossible anymore. The Siege of Tyre, 332 BC, when Alexander transformed from a shrewd commander into a man who would not accept defeat. After Issus, Tyre was no longer just a city, it was a test of Alexander's prestige. Why Tyre in particular? Because it was a fortified island city, a naval and commercial power, and it refused to open its gates. Alexander could have bypassed it, but he didn't, because retreating before a small city would mean the collapse of the image of the invincible leader. And so came the decision to besiege it. A stone bridge was built from the mainland to the island, and after months of fighting, heavy losses, and clear defiance, And here we must tell the truth. This was not a purely military decision, but a decision of personal pride. Fall and punishment, and the siege began. After the fall of Tyre, a widespread massacre took place. Thousands of inhabitants were sold into slavery, and almost total destruction. A critical reading of what happened the siege of Tyre enhanced Alexander's prestige. But it also revealed the beginning of his excessive cruelty, and it proved that Alexander does not forgive those who openly challenge his authority. After Tyre, the real question arises: how far will he go to prove that he is invincible? And here we move to the pursuit of Darius, from a war between nations to a personal obsession. After Issus, Darius was not merely a fugitive, he also possessed the legitimacy that Alexander desired. Here we discuss the peace offers made by Darius, a point that should not be overlooked. Darius offered immense wealth, vast territories, a political marriage, rationally, indeed, an excellent offer. But Alexander refused. Why? Because he no longer wanted half of Asia, all of Asia. Alexander's psychological transformation. Here begins the real danger. He was no longer fighting for Greece. Not for revenge, but to be the sole king. This is a crucial distinction we must understand. And so began the hunt for Darius. Through the heart of the empire. A drain on the army. An expansion with no clear end in sight. And here we say, a man who does not accept enough will not know when to stop. And here is what we understand. Granicus, the establishment of legitimacy. Issus, the shattering of the king's prestige. Tyre, the beginning of cruelty. The hunt for Darius, the birth of obsession. This is not just history. This is an anatomy of power when no one tells it, stop. The Battle of Gaugamela, 331 BC, the military climax. At Gaugamela, the question was not, would Alexander win? But, could one mind defeat an entire empire in a single battle? And the real context here. Darius assembled the largest army of his life. And he carefully chose an open plain. Prepare. Sickly chariots, and overwhelming numerical superiority. This time, Darius hadn't erred in his choice of terrain. As for Alexander's plan, genius without legend, Alexander did something unexpected. He didn't attack the center directly. He moved at a flank, drawing the Persian army along with him. He created a gap in Darius's center. Then, he launched a concentrated attack to the heart. And once again, Darius fled. The army collapsed. And here's a crucial point. Alexander didn't win by force, but by forcing his opponent to make poor decisions under pressure. Why is Gaugamela a turning point? Babylon fell. Susa, then Persepolis. The Persian Empire ceased to be a central power. Alexander was no longer a conqueror. He had become the de facto ruler of Asia. Gaugamela was not Alexander's greatest victory, but the last time he had a clear objective. From here, we move directly to the transformation. Second, the transformation into king of Persia, and the beginning of the split. After Gaugamela, Alexander no longer had a clear external enemy, so the conflict began within him. What changed? Alexander adorned himself with Persian dress, adopted court rituals, demanded to be worshipped, bring the Persians closer and distanced the Macedonians. These are not innocent cultural details. This is a redefinition of power. And the reaction of the army and officers, the veteran officers felt humiliated. The psychological gap widened, resentment turned to fear, and here a pivotal event occurred. The killing of Clitus the Black, the man who had saved his life. This was not a slip-up. This was a sign of losing control. An analytical reading of what happened. Alexander, victory over all his rivals. But he failed to manage his identity after victory. His transformation into king of Persia was necessary to govern a vast empire. But he destroyed the psychological bond with his army. In conclusion, Gaugamela represents the pinnacle of military genius. And transformation represents what happens when genius is not accompanied by institutions and boundaries. Alexander knew how to conquer, but he didn't know how to stop. India and rebellion. When Alexander reached the limits of human ambition, after becoming king of Asia, Alexander no longer faced a clear enemy, so he decided to go further than anyone who had come before him. He chose India. And here we ask, why India? The answer: not because it was a direct threat, but because no one had reached it before. It represented the end of the known world. To stop would implicitly acknowledge that conquest has limits. This was more of a psychological decision than a strategic one. The Battle of the Hydaspes, 326 BC. The opponent was King Porus, a large army accompanied by war elephants. Across difficult terrain and monsoon rains, Alexander won, but with heavy losses and unprecedented exhaustion, and without a decisive political impact. Note: this victory did not ignite enthusiasm, but rather exhausted it. The mutiny, the point we must pay attention to. At the Hythes River, the soldiers refused to advance. No speeches, no threats, no genius. Alexander stopped. And here is the harsh truth. For the first time, Alexander did not impose his will. Not because he was weak, but because the army had reached its limit. The indomitable commander collided with human soldiers. In India, Alexander was not defeated in battle, but he was defeated by the limits of humanity. Death and the disintegration of the empire. A fall without a fight. Alexander, who survived thousands of swords, fell ill. Before the illness, Alexander returned from his eastern campaign. He stayed in Babylon preparing for a new campaign, likely against Arabia. He participated in feasts and heavy drinking. The onset of the illness, he felt a sharp pain after a feast. He developed a high fever. The illness lasted about 10 to 12 days. The documented symptoms in the sources: rising fever, extreme weakness, loss of speech. In the final days, consciousness persisted until near the end. It was not a sudden death. It was a slow decline. In the final days, Alexander became incapable of leading. He was carried on a litter. Soldiers were allowed to pass by one to see him. This moment is significant. The leader, who had never been defeated in battle, was bid farewell by his soldiers in silence, unable to speak. The moment of death, he died relatively peacefully. No screams, no heroic spectacle, just the body ceasing to function. And he died in Babylon, 323 BC, age 32. What matters is not how he died, but what he left behind. The question he did not answer when asked, "To whom do you leave the empire?" He said, "To the strongest." This is not a wise statement. This is a political disaster. And here is the immediate disintegration. No heir ready, no system of government, no institutions. The result: wars among his generals, the Diadochi, and the division of the empire, and the project's demise within years, and the greatest conquest in history, without a state to survive it. The intellectual conclusion: Alexander broke the boundaries of geography. But he did not build the boundaries of power. He conquered everyone. But he did not conquer one question: what comes after me? Alexander the Great was not a failure, but he was a warning. A warning that individual power, however great, does not create a state, nor does it withstand the test of time. Alexander did not simply die young. He died without a plan, and without a state capable of surviving after him. Alexander the Great was not defeated in battle, nor did he fall before an army. He fell before three things he overlooked: the body, that cannot endure a project without interruption; time, that does not wait for great leaders to plan for succession; the state, that is not built by individual will alone. Alexander changed the map of the world, but he did not build a system capable of surviving after him. And when he died in Babylon, his empire didn't die instantly, but it began to disintegrate at that very moment. The greatest irony of his history. The man who subdued kings, never subdued a single question: what will happen after me? Therefore, Alexander is not just a story of conquest, but a harsh lesson in leadership. Strength creates victory, but only institutions create continuity. And here ended the life of Alexander the Great, and the fall of what he didn't know how to protect began.